Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of an unexpected podcast. And I'm joined by my co-hosts Matt, Evan, usual guest here, and then also now a new recurring guest from Australia, Henry Kerr. So he'll be actually joining us to go over the Australian meta. We're actually going to be talking about that in detail today, exactly how how things are done in the far off continent. And then before we get into that, though, we're going to do our usual list review. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see the list posted up. You can also comment in the comment section below and submit a list for our review. We're going to be analyzing from a competitive perspective a list with a Beorning Fiefdoms alliance. And so that'll be interesting. And then what we'll do is go into the Australian meta from there. And then for those who want to be spoiled on it, we'll be going into the Rings of Power episode 6. So we'll tell you when we're doing that. So hopefully if you don't want to be spoiled, you can drop off there, as I will have to since I have not seen the episode yet. So with that being said, Matt, what list, how was this Beornings Feast from the list go?
All right. So I'm going to put that up in just a second. But before I do that, I do want to make sure to remind everybody that tickets have gone on sale for Articon next year. So the 5-day tickets have gone on sale. So if you want to come for the entire Articon experience starting on Wednesday going through Sunday, you should get your tickets now. I think smaller tickets like the 4-day ticket run, if you're going to skip the Wednesday pre-tournament, will go on sale later, and then 3-day tickets later than that. But make sure if you're getting your 5-day tickets, you get them now. I know I've got mine.
And actually, considering we're filming this on October 1st, imagine when this uploads, you'll probably have far less tickets available. How many is it sold so far? 120?
I think it's sold like 125. Yeah.
Yeah. So that they're actually going by pretty fast, considering it's the first day of sale.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully there will still be tickets available when people actually see this.
Yeah. Pick them up.
With that said,
some of us will be there. Some of us will be there. And this time we will be wearing t-shirts. So that'll be a good way to identify us. So if you're going, we'll be happy to see you there.
Yep, that's right. Some of us will be there, and some of us may be wearing t-shirts if I remember to put the order in this time. So we'll see.
I'll be there for sure. All right. Well, I guess, Matt, you're pulling up the list now?
I'm pulling up the list now. I'm punching buttons. I'm sharing a screen, and here it is. Okay, so this is a list from Team at Tiberius. And by the way, just so people know, others who submitted this list or submitted lists from this time around, this was on our Articon meta episode. We got a number of lists that were submitted, all of which seem to be fiefdoms, or I'm sorry, fiefdoms. And this one we ended up choosing because it was fiefdoms with an ally that we'll get to in a group. So, or in a moment here, but that's why we chose it. We didn't want to necessarily ignore your other fiefdoms, but this allowed us to talk about something other than just fiefdoms working it in. So challenge to the group. I'm working on an article on Grimbeorn and Beornings not in their legendary legion. And he's asking, what factions do you think it would be good to ally with them? And do you think losing the army bonus for basically everyone changes the way certain armies play? And to prime the discussion, he gave us a list. So this is a 700-point allied fiefdoms list. And it starts out with Grimbeorn, who is the army leader. He has with him 4 Beornings, 3 Beornings with great bows. And they have a convenient ally, which is Forlong the Fat on horse. He has 4 Axemen of Lossernach, 2 Blackroot Vale archers, and 5 Blackroot Vale archers with spears. And he's got a convenient ally, which is a Captain of Dol Amroth on armored horse with lance, a Knight of Dol Amroth on armored horse with lance, 4 Clansmen of Lamadon, and 4 Axemen of Lossernach. So it comes out with 30 models, 3 great bows, 7 regular bows, 4 he's got 4 defensive models, 3 cavalry, 1 bear, and 8 might points. So I guess he raises some questions at the beginning that I guess we can discuss. But before we get in that, we had a little discussion before the beginning of the show, just going back over the rules and figuring out when and under what circumstances Beornings can get allied into anything. And I think I'm going to summarize what we found out in this, and somebody tell me if I'm characterizing it wrong. But the way you have to decode this is Beornings aren't an ally in and of themselves. They have a legendary legion. But the legendary legion says these are not in an army. If you go to Grimbeorn's profile, Grimbeorn has a little box at the bottom saying that he is green allies with Thranduil's Halls and yellow allies, with pretty much everybody from the War of the Ring era armies, and that includes the fiefdoms. And then if you go to the Beornings profile, it says that Beornings can be in warbands led by Grimbeorn. So if you put all those three things together, what you end up with is Grimbeorn can be allied into War of the Ring era armies, and with him he can take Beornings, but you can't bring Beorn or guys in a Beorn-led warband. You can only do that in a Legendary Legion.
We have not correctly checked the FAQ.
Yeah, we've not quite checked the FAQ, but that's how we think it works, at least in the book. And guys, have I kind of gone through it correctly as we all read it?
Yeah, I mean that's what I read as well. So it seems like your only option for Alliance is Grimbeorn, if assuming you want to bring Beornings with him.
Right. All right. So let's put this to the crowd here and start answering these questions. What factions do you want to ally them with? And I guess what are the characteristics of these factions?
So immediately off the jump, like when I see fiefdoms, that you're allying. So you're allying with an army that doesn't want to lose its bonus very much. So I kind of that immediately, I'm kind of like, why fiefdoms? I see the reasons that he chose. I'm not sure. I mean, 7 Blackroot Vale Archers, I think that's really what he wanted. It seems like that's really kind of what he was going for, because the spear support from the Axeman is just like anyone could have done that, especially amongst the Alliance options that he has available. And I don't mind certainly having spear supported Beornings, though I'd consider having them with a banner, which I don't see he has there, because I imagine you want to maximize the amount of fights they're going to win because you're putting a lot of weight into that line. So I'm not really convinced that
don't the Beornings get a banner reroll within 6 inches of a bear?
Oh yeah,
I think that's their Legendary Legion though. But maybe I'm wrong.
So
no, he's right. Evan's correct.
No, followers of the bear. Yeah, it's in their profile. Yep.
So okay, so the banner bonuses are built in, and if that front line falls apart, then I guess you lose that. But luckily, two wounds should help. I'm still okay. So cool. Then we have that. That's built into the Beornings though. So once again, I'm not really sure fiefdoms are the route to go. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, why the fiefdoms, other than the Blackroot Vale Archers, which I'm sure we'll talk about. You're getting Forlong the Fat, who's nothing special other than, a large might pool for, and he's a pretty hard hitting hero to take out troops. But like after that, you're getting a marching captain, which, most other armies can provide, that this group can ally with. So, I mean, unless I'm wrong, why fiefdoms? I'm not really sure. I'd almost be more tempted to try to find an ally that it kind of provides a little bit more than this. My immediate thought is, if I want to ally Beornings into anything, it'll be something with a large number count to offset the small number count, and then something that maybe, like, obviously provides spear support, but maybe I don't know, protection to the Beornings. Kind of difficult to say without Gandalf of some sort, but like, that's kind of my immediate thing is like, I'm like, well, don't you want like kind of a horde with this, or don't you want, that kind of option, or something that supports Grimbeorn in a unique way, or multiple hard hitting components, like if you have like Aragorn and Boromir kind of thing, like, so now Grimbeorn, I guess, with Forlong. So that's my immediate thing. I don't think anything really enhances the Beornings other than the spears. But I mean, that's just my first thoughts. I mean, Evan, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I've actually put a decent amount of thought into doing this sort of alliance. And I think the alliance sort of falls into the inherent flaw that was always prevalent in the bear models, which is that bears suck. That
No
being that without monstrous charge, having a 200-point monster model that, it only moves 8 inches, it doesn't fly, which is extremely bad. it's only got 3 attacks. So even though it's got the fight 8 and the crazy strength and the crazy defense, it's just gonna lose a bunch of fights that it should be winning. But enough naysaying. I think first and foremost, when you're allying in Beornings to another list, they should probably, all of them should have two-handed weapons, is my thinking, because you're getting them in order to increase and maximize your damage output, and taking guys with great bows, especially seeing as the majority of your armies are going to have pretty low numbers, isn't really going to provide a whole lot. Just because you're not going to have a lot of great bows, you're probably not going to be out shooting your opponent, so you just want to maximize your damage in combat. Now, I'm pretty much in agreement with Devin that I think the Fiefdoms Alliance just isn't it with this sort of list. The Blackroot Vale Archers are just so incredibly squishy, and when you have a small army with like this that is you want them to be able to take as much damage as possible and be able to weather the storm. But Blackroot Vale Archers just aren't going to be able to do that. Yeah, and Forlong and the Captain just are suboptimal models for this sort of thing. So the two.
Well, hang on a second. Why are they suboptimal models for this?
I didn't.
Well, one, they're expensive, and not ridiculously expensive, but expensive enough where at 700 points, your model cap is going to be neutered, for lack of a better word, which is one, it's only got 30 models, and two, you have a grand total of 7 Beornings, which is not a lot at all. And two, they don't really provide Grim Beorn any support. It's just sort of, they go out and they fight things and don't have heroic strike. So if a hero gets into them, they die. And then Grim Beorn does his own thing and then probably gets bogged down. So with such a big centerpiece model like Grim Beorn, you're going to either want models that directly support Grim Beorn or models that maximize the sheer number of models you can get. So the two factions I've thought of that I think best facilitate this, and noting here that this is just Lord of the Rings factions, because with Hobbit factions, this is an impossible alliance. One of them is Lothlorien, which I think probably functions better at higher points values than 700 points, because at 700, your model count is still going to be quite low. And the reason I say Lothlorien is because it provides Galadriel, who can give magic support by transfixing and compelling certain models, so Grim Beorn can eat them, and also provides blinding light support, which is very important for your defense for big beefy troops to be able to survive. And the other option I was thinking of is sort of more leaning into that cheap chaff kind of idea, which is Gondor with Denethor, which does sound pretty insane, but allows you to just absolutely maximize the number of troops you can take. So in my mind, I don't have this list written out for 700 points, but I would probably take Denethor, Madril, and then maybe a cheap third hero if you run out of warband slots, and then take more Beornings, maybe up to like 8, 9, 10, something like that, and then just spam troops and see how many you can get. Which sort of gives you that extremely hard-hitting front line, good model count, and powerful hero in Grim Beorn, along with the high defense of the Gondorian troops to help protect your Beornings. So I think in my mind, those are the two best options for the alliance.
There's a quick commentary on the chaff. The one reason since I bring the horde is because, in my opinion, you're not bringing Grim Beorn for the bear. You're bringing it for the Beornings. the Beorning front line, basically like a half troll front line. The bear comes with it, but no one liked bringing the bear before. So why are we bringing him now? Well, it's because he leads these troops and he's the only one who can do it. So maximizing the Beornings by bringing in large amounts of troops that can then support a larger amount of Beornings, as Evan mentioned, cheaper. I love the Denethor example. I didn't even think about that. Is, really taking advantage of, in my opinion, why you're actually bringing this guy. I think it's who he can bring in play. So that's just my thought on that idea.
Henry, what are your thoughts?
So I didn't appreciate, because perhaps I don't know my lore well enough, but that Grimbeon couldn't be taken with Hobbit lists, but perhaps for the thought process of it, my mind immediately went to Gandalf the Grey on Horse for the magic support with Lake Town Militia. Now you can swap out Lake Town Militia for, I think Gondor Chaff is a good option, but the important thing there I think was actually Gandalf for the magic. Cheap transfixes and blinding light and whatnot. Look, I think I sort of see what the guy's going for with fiefdoms. I think that the reason why he's gone for fiefdoms is actually for the captain, because for 85 points you've got a fight 5 defense 7 lance with march. There aren't too many other models that I know of that get that for 85 points, and I get that the model's expensive, but in terms of what that model brings for this army, with then troops, I think that what he's going for is sort of an elite group that hits hard but doesn't like to necessarily get hit back. And when you've got the lance and you're on the charge, and you've got the march, you can sort of get in and out of trouble as you need to. My greatest worry at looking at this list was the shooting. If you come up at 700 points, only having 10 bows, I get a few of them are great bows, but you haven't got any shooting heroes. A shooting army or Uruk-hai crossbow is just going to tear through this, and you don't actually have the numbers to sort of last. You've got the march to get there quickly, but it's just a bit worrying on that regard, and it could get shut down by a big magic hero like a ring wraith on a fell beast or something like that. So look, it's interesting, but I think at 700 points, it's just a little bit too squishy. And yeah, without monstrous charge, I don't think the Grimbeon is a good enough centerpiece for the army whereby it can carry the 2 warbands of fiefdom. My eyes did glance very briefly at, and tell me what you think about this, I haven't thought this through, but as an ally, Dead of Dunharrow, because you've got the defense 8, you actually don't need the shooting with your defense 8, defense 7 models, defense 8 with shields. You've got the King of the Dead, who has got Harbinger of Evil, which will make it much more difficult for any armies to charge Bayon, let alone the entire front line. And they're expensive, but they're elite. And the King has March. So basically, you plop down Bayon and his Grimbeon and the Beornings. You pop down the King of the Dead, a couple of heralds, and as many guys as you can fit, and you march to whatever you don't like, and you fight wherever you want. And they will eventually have to fight you. And if they don't, then you can push them off objectives, because that's pretty scary. A terrifying defense 8, Grimbeon and Beornings with Dead of Dunharrow. So I don't know. What do you guys think of that? And yeah, that's my 5 cents.
Before I comment on the Dunharrow, I just want to quickly, the Lake Town list that I like that idea, but they're impossible, right? They're an impossible.
They're impossible, yeah.
So
that's a shame.
Yeah, so I don't know that I would want to risk breaking so easily, because you're going to put those half trolls, Beornings, in your front line. So that would be a concern for me. I would almost rather, if I'm going to make an impossible alliance, make it harder to break me by only taking like 1 model. So like let's say Grimbeon was amazing, or like Gullivar, for example. Like just drop, not obviously not for this list, but I'm just saying, like I would drop Gullivar in like a list, right? Because you got to kill him to break me. That's just an example. I know he's squishy and all that, but anyway. As far as your idea about Dunharrow, I'd want to build that list out, but actually it's intriguing.
Intriguing until you realize that Dead of Dunharrow is impossible allies with every army list that doesn't include Aragorn.
So what actually with the Grimbeon? who can the Grimbeon? Who can Grimbeon actually ally with consistently in an alliance matrix? I don't have it in front of me.
No, actually,
basically,
Evan's totally right. Like, I guess there's the assumption that you might bring Beorn, Aragorn, and the Dead of like
you could do that.
How?
if you took those three models.
It doesn't even make any sense.
Well, what? Yeah,
you wouldn't have a list.
Right. One of the
It would
things
just be heroes.
One of the things I was toying around with, and I haven't run the numbers on this, was because obviously, obviously what you want is you want bulk around Grimbeorn and Beornings, and what I was thinking was, what's going to give you more cheap bulk than the Shire? The problem with the Shire is you don't have spears, which is somewhat of an issue, and they're not particularly mobile. There are ways to solve that, though. One of the ways you can solve that, one of the ways you can solve that is by doing Shire plus. And by the way, in the Shire, I'm sorry, the Shire also doesn't have a banner. But ways you can solve that are by throwing the Rangers in.
Ooh,
and you can, you can actually, one thing you can do is you can throw in, Aragorn, and then a whole bunch of
if I remind you, you lose that Ranger army bonus, and you no longer have to attack Rangers. Like those Rangers.
Yeah, I don't think you actually throw Rangers.
Okay.
I think what you do is you throw the heroes in. And you can do this. You can throw in Aragorn, and then you can throw in Merry and a bunch of hobbits and some other cheap hobbit heroes, and just whatever is the cheapest way to get slots to get hobbits in there. I haven't done the math on it, but Aragorn and Grimbeorn together are actually, I think, a pretty potent combination, because you basically run Aragorn up kind of behind the bear to start with, and use the bear as just like an arrow shield till you get in close. And then, Aragorn just goes in standing next to the bear and is always calling heroic moves, and potentially heroic combats, kind of next to the bear to keep the two of them moving forward, and just kind of keeps moving the bear forward.
You're almost taking Aragorn just for the mighty hero to keep Grimbeorn moving.
Well, yeah, and also to get a second, fight six striking hero in there to do some damage. But as long as he stays near the bear, he can kind of keep them both moving forward each turn. And the way bear armies lose, right, is that people run away from the bear and start killing other things. And if Aragorn is always near the bear and keeping the bear moving and marching the bear when the bear needs to march, that solves some of the problems. And the Shire can just kind of stay near him. Yeah. And the Shire can just kind of stay near him with a bunch of 18-inch bows and rocks, so that if people say, well, I'm not going to charge the bear, I'm going to stand back here, they can throw rocks and shoot arrows. That was kind of the thought there. Another option is, instead, if you don't want to do Aragorn, you can go with Halbarad and the banner, so you get the 6-inch banner to help with all your Beornings, and you can take Arathorn with them, who gives you another fight 5 hero. Because there's nothing, it would be wrong lore-wise, but I don't think there's anything in the way the rule is written that says that you can't ally Arathorn in with this list, because he's part of the Rangers, and the Rangers are yellow.
Arathorn might have a time issue where.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking of that. I don't think you can put him. Yeah, let me look this up real quick. The key thing is, well, yeah, you need Arathorn to get Halbarad in there. Let me see if this actually works.
So, just for anyone wondering, like, the one reason we want a banner in the list outside of Grimbeorn is because the banner helps.
Oh no, sorry, Arathorn makes it impossible allies. Forget that. Just throw in Aragorn.
The Matrix sort of makes this difficult, because we're looking for alternatives to the fiefdoms, and it seems like a lot of them are sort of ruled out that actually provide good utility. And is the issue here almost that Grimbeorn itself isn't a great model? Like, am I being too bold in saying that?
No, I don't think you're being too bold at all. Beorn was never taken. and no one has ever even tried to take him. That Legion grants Beorn a lot of tools that he doesn't have normally that makes him usable. But like I said, we're not like, in my opinion, Grim Beorn is a tax to get the Beornings. Like, if he was any good, people would have already been taken. Because I mean, the only difference between Grim Beorn and Beorn is fight 7 now reduction, and then control, of course. But other than that,
which is actually a big difference, right?
And I'm not saying it's not, but he still does not have the hard-hitting power that you would expect of a 200-point model. And so that's where I'm like, I like Evan's list with Denethor the most, because I'm like, you're maximizing now one of the other aspects that Grim Beorn's benefit is, you're bringing in these fight 5 to attack troops. Now you can spam them, but basically you can bring them with the spear support numbers necessary, and those numbers come with defense 6. I mean, sure, I do agree with Henry about the Knight of Dual Amaroth being a very cheap fight 5 lance, hard-hitting option. But I mean, trying to think, Madrill, I get you're bringing from March, Evan, but if you could replace Madrill with someone slightly harder hitting, I'd be curious what that is.
You need March in this list.
What about Boromir? Not of the White Tower, but like, if you dropped him, that's a lot of points. I get it. Boromir is like 110 plus, Denethor 35 plus then 200, and then Beornings are expensive. But if you could bring Boromir the Fellowship combined with all of that, and then maybe one more cheap captain or something, just to grab more troops in there, I wonder if you'd have almost 30 models.
That seems entirely feasible at slightly higher points, I think.
If you were going to do it, you'd have to do it like very cheap Gondor heroes. So I'm thinking like a Baragond, Irolas, like Madrill, like that level of cheap. I wouldn't go any more expensive.
So then you'd have like almost 30 troops, maybe, which is not great, but considering they're all defense 6, possible. You have Boromir, another hard-hitting option. You have the March that you need. You have a March also in that Baragond or Irolas model. You'd have the spam chaff, spear supports, no banner. That's a problem. Maybe we might want to try to fit one in somehow. I don't know. Off the top of my head, it sounds impossible, but that's kind of the route. And so maybe the answer, I don't know.
Why wouldn't you put a banner in for Minas Tirith?
No, I would want to, but I mean, we're already talking about Boromir.
We're just talking captain
model.
Okay. Yeah, that's losing 3 more models is the trade-off.
Yeah, I get
with
it.
The banner.
Okay. So basically, absolutely you'd want one, because Beorn with a banner is much better. But that's my immediate thought process, is like, okay, maybe the 800 you play it with what Evan was suggesting. I mean, otherwise Shire. I like Matt's suggestion of Shire with Aragorn. You still don't have banner, you still don't have speed, but
yeah, it's not clear to me. It's not clear to me how much you need the banner. It's not clear to me how much you need speed. You need spears if you have enough bodies. And that makes bodies.
You don't need the banner, but if you are bringing 2 hard-hitting heroes such as like Boromir and Beorn, it'd be nice to have one, but it's certainly not necessary. I mean, not being on the back foot in those missions where it's required is nice, but I agree. It's not required. You wouldn't need it.
Yeah, I mean, you could, if you have enough points, get both Aragorn and Halbrand in the banner. But I think you be high enough points. At that point, you kind of have those 2, and then you get as cheap a hobbits as you can, and just get bodies.
One problem I'm noticing with the Shire, though, is that you're getting a lot of numbers, and you've got Aragorn who has to stick close to Grimbeorn. Let's say you're calling marches to get Grimbeorn where you need him. You're going to be leaving a substantial part of your army outside of that 6-inch march range, and it's actually not that hard to run away from hobbits, even when they're going 7 inches. So because of the lack of speed on half of the hobbits, the march for Grimbeorn is potentially somewhat diminished, because now you're still separating the army at some point, and that leaves a whole flank of hobbits that are sitting there ready to be swept through very quickly to get them to get the break point. If you're up against a fast-moving opponent with let's say a drum or something, I mean, imagine, Matthew, that you got the cataphract drum and the pike block of Eastern.
I think the way you do this is you have Aragorn in Aragorn and the bear in the middle. You have your Beornings with axes next to them. And then you have hobbits kind of behind them, and hobbits with bows, maybe stiffened by a few Beornings with great bows on the flanks.
No, I actually have to agree with Henry. Actually, just thinking about my time even playing with these guys, like you're basically moving at 7 inches speed, even with March. You are not speeding up Beorn, and if you're going to keep him in the middle like that,
so that's why I think I think that the stuff that moves quickly is the stuff in the middle, and that's the Beornings and the bear and what's his name, Aragorn. And then you've got your two flanks with bows, and the two flanks with bows aren't moving very quickly. They're mostly just kind of getting into range of shooting and then starting to shoot, or they're running to objectives and shooting. And then whichever way the enemy goes, Aragorn, the enemy is either going to try and go around and get at the left flank archers, or he's going to try and go around and get at the right flank archers. And you take all the stuff in the center and you wait till he goes that way, and then you march and you fall in on his flank. And then you have the fight there. And the other bowmen and hobbits on the other side either waddle up behind that and get there when they get there, or they stand and they shoot, or they run and get objectives and say, the heck with it, you guys fight the war. I think that's how it works. I mean, whether or not that's the best solution or not, I don't know. But and like I said, I haven't built this list, so I haven't seen how many numbers you end up with this.
Yeah.
But it may be that you're going to have enough numbers so that, because as soon as he tries to go after one flank of hobbits, that flank of hobbits just stops and it just shoots and it waits to receive. And then the bear and all the faster moving stuff just kind of fall in to support it. And I suspect that's going to be a problem for most armies, that they're not going to be able to kind of fall on that flank and kill it before the bear and Aragorn and a whole bunch of Beornings slam into their own flank. But maybe I'm wrong. I'd have to run the numbers and try it out. It was kind of a thought experiment.
Well, as part of that thought experiment, I still. Oh, go ahead, Henry.
I was just thinking. So, because Grimbeorns are set in the Lord of the Rings time period, right? And you get the Beornings, and that's why it's impossible to do Hobbit Matrix Alliance, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Say it one more time.
So why is it impossible to Hobbit army list alliances? And it's because of the time period, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any way in which you could do, they brought out the new Bane and models for Dale Rebuilt. Is there any way you could ally them in with Grimbeorn?
Yeah.
It says Garrison of Dale so long as it includes Brand or Bard II.
Well, that could almost work because, as I said earlier, my mind immediately went to Lake Town Militia, and Dale actually isn't massively far off that. You get nice, cheap troops. You get March with your captains, and their Fight 5 captains as well. You can get a banner in there too, and then you can get the Beornings in, which is the whole point of the list. That could work quite well.
I think that definitely works better than this list that we're seeing here on the screen. So I think.
And you can get Gandalf in too if you want. Gandalf the Grey, and then Captains of Dale with a Bane.
Well, Gandalf
might be a bit expensive.
Well, I guess Gandalf the Grey would have to come in as part of the Fellowship, which you could do. You could just throw him into this list, regardless of what he's.
No, I think the inclusion of Brand or Bard II makes the Fellowship impossible.
Because you can't ally with them.
Yeah, because once they're included, you suddenly lose them.
Yeah.
But,
okay, so that's not going to work then.
But however,
then you lose Gandalf.
That doesn't.
Dale's the important bit.
I don't think it's even required though. I mean, because if you're looking at Dale, you're going to bring in kind of a spam of troops, and then you'll have two hard hitting heroes. You can bring Brand and Bard II, right?
The problem is though that Dale is not that cheap. Right, it's actually, once you start adding in the bows and stuff like that, it's actually more expensive than the troops in this army.
But only more expensive than
and so are the heroes.
Well, Gondor is not the troops is not making it cheap. It's Denethor.
Right.
He's bringing 15 models for 35 points. That's what makes them cheaper.
It's only 55 points for a captain and Dale.
Yeah, but you bring 3 less troops. And so when doing that math out, like you have another captain tax at the 12th model, and also Denethor's cheaper. So like those two in combined probably net you an average of like maybe, I'm spitballing here, but like 8 troops extra just because of that relationship. I'd have to actually do the math of exactly how that would work. So, but
so my other issue with doing Denethor and cheaper heroes for troop spam is, what do you do in a Maelstrom scenario? Denethor doesn't have any might to bump up his roll to stay with Beorn.
That's part of the reason why my list had both Denethor and Madril in it, because Madril gives you that +1 or a -1 on the Maelstrom scenarios.
You'd have to deploy Denethor first and then follow up with all the other troops getting +1 to be around him. But good call on that, Evan. I didn't
wait a minute. Why wouldn't you want to do Madril first and then Denethor getting the bonus?
Because then if Denethor, well, actually, what you'd want to do is you want to put Madril on the northern board edge. So basically, whatever number you roll, you can either bump it up or down, either down to a 1 or up to 1, where you can deploy on the northern board edge.
Probably preferably toward the corner, because I imagine then you could, if you get an east-west number. Well, I guess it wouldn't matter because you could bump it. So yeah.
If you do it near the corner, you can pretty much cover it. But I think you definitely want to put Madril in first and then get Denethor where you want him.
I just would worry you lose a whole warband, and if Denethor's number is quite off. But you're right.
That's the thing. Once you get Madril on the board, his number can't be that far off.
Yeah.
Because a 3 becomes a 4, a 2 becomes a 1.
Sure. Then I guess
unfortunately, if Denethor comes first, his number can be off, because he can get a 2 or 3 and you get stuck in the middle of the boonies.
Sure.
So
then I guess I mean, I imagine that once we play around with these numbers and lists, you can find all that. But I think Team at Tiberius, the big thing I think we can all agree on here is that the fiefdoms probably isn't it, or at least this variation of the way you've done it.
So look, I don't want to sell this list too far short. I think this list is a fine attempt, and it's going in the right directions. I think there are ways, kind of, we've been spitballing in this, that it might be taken further in those directions, but the right ideas are here, right? You want more numbers of kind of decently priced troops. You want to march. You want spear backup for your Beornings. And you want another guy who can do some damage, which Forlong can do, even though he doesn't have a strike. But I mean, I think what we're talking about is you want a second striker, you want a banner if possible, and you want as many numbers as you can get.
Now, before we let this topic go, I just want to, and I want to go into all the list variations of it, but I know that we all agree, it seems, that 1 bear sucks. What about 2 bears, no Beornings? Would that be interesting in like a spam list of some sort, like Gondor variant that we talked about? Or would it be more interesting to just bring the 7 Beornings or something?
I think if you're going to take 2 bears, you take the Legion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think if you're really dead set on doing that, Beorn turns into Gwahir, because Gwahir is better and cheaper.
Agree with that. Yeah, I can take. Okay. Then all right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on from this subject. Hopefully that's a big deep dive into because I'm sure a lot of other players were thinking about this, like how exactly can we abuse the earnings and get them into the list and such. It's quite difficult, unfortunately. We'll see if maybe later editions change alliance matrices or whatever. I don't know how they'll ever do it, and if they even know it's coming soon. But that's probably what we're gonna have to wait on, because it seems impossible for right now, or very difficult. So that being said, Henry's going to be going into some of the lists he's seeing, or kind of the overall meta. For anyone who's seen our meta analysis videos, we often kind of go into a general overview of exactly what we're seeing in different countries around the world. Crazy enough, you'll actually see pretty drastically different metas depending on where you are. And so Henry's going to be enlightening us on that. So go ahead and start us off with what are your thoughts on the Australian meta?
So first of all, I don't think it's actually so much a meta of how the lists are constructed in Australia as to how they're played. That's what I noticed when I went over to Europe to play in Hardicon, was that a lot of the lists, there was perhaps a bit more of a predilection for shield walls. very like sort of old historical wargaming lists to an extent. Shield walls, spear walls, pike walls, big blocks of archers, macro moves on the board, and positioning. I think the Australian community is far more geared towards the smaller moves and the smaller combinations. And yeah, I wouldn't say that there's actually too much of a meta at the moment. But in terms of how it's played, it's a massive focus on movement. I think in terms of the games, you see a lot of games in Australia where the combat isn't joined, even with combat armies, for a long time into the game, because there's a lot of micro positioning that happens. Whereas I noticed in the European gaming, it was deploy, shoot, engage, and then it's just a slog. Now, I think, I saw with Matt's play style certainly did, when we were doubles, certainly countered that very well, because he did a lot of positioning at the start of getting his army to where we wanted to fight. But I think that's something that is a big focus in the Australian community. Look, in terms of lists, you'll see less shield walls, but look, a lot of the same traits are the same. Lots of Minas Tirith these days, despite all the new fancy things coming out, new models and whatnot. Minas Tirith just doesn't ever seem to go anywhere.
That is actually quite a difference from our meta, honestly.
And also the Articon meta. Frankly.
Yeah, I would say that's actually pretty, like, you're saying Minas Tirith, but I'm like, you don't really see that anywhere. it's kind of like
really, we get a lot of Minas Tirith at our tournaments. I think there's also an element of the player base is quite interesting, in the sense that what you've got is a lot of new players who the Minas Tirith is very attractive to play and to go back to and to learn with. But then you've also got in the Australian community a group of people who have been playing, particularly where I'm from, Victoria, have been playing for like decades by this point, who have every model in the range. And they can go for the lists that are perhaps a little bit harder to do, because, you buy ballistas that cost $55 for 2 models or whatever it is. If you're 2 years into the game, 3 years into the game, you can't do that. But in Australia, you've got sort of a sub genre of people who are able to whip out those lists that are quite interesting to see. So yeah, look, that's sort of the case. I can't go too much more into it, because over the last couple of years I've been playing less. But yeah, I'd say that's sort of.
To be fair, I imagine most have.
Yeah, I say everybody has.
Yeah. Well, you said the last 2 years, and we're like, well, that's probably most of the world has been playing.
Yeah, good point. I did see a list that I do want to talk about very quickly that I've been losing sleep over, and it's a friend of mine has made it. It's a Helm Hammerhand list, basically with mass spam foot Rohan bodyguards with throwing spears, and then just 2 captains of Rohan. And it has been giving me sleepless nights because it's a damn good list. But anyway, all those points.
Does that list operate at higher point levels? Because normally Helm Hammerhand.
No, it doesn't. Doesn't go beyond 700 points, but it's set at 650 to 700. Man, I am struggling to think of anything that can take it on reliably. So anyway, that's sort of my comments on the Australian meta, but do with it what you will.
Well, we can actually go off of that and just ask a few questions, and we'll follow up on this whole Rohan list that maybe we can find some ideas on it. So I guess as far as, okay, so you guys, I mean, let's put this in perspective anyway. You've had how many tournaments probably since the release of COVID? So, I mean, I assume not an extreme amount. Do you have like one a month? Is kind of like ish?
Yes, at least somewhere in Australia, there will definitely be one a month.
Okay, so you mentioned somewhere in Australia. For those who don't know, Australia is actually a very large country. And so I imagine you're not playing in all of these, like they're quite a drive to each one.
Or a small continent, depending on your
continent. Yeah, however you want to look at it, right? So I imagine like the average Australian, because Americans have this problem where like we have a lot of tournaments, but we're not going all of them. So the average Australian goes to what, like 3, 4? Like, what do you think?
Well, it depends what state you're from. So Victoria would have, and New South Wales have easily the most. I reckon I probably go to 8 tournaments a year, if not more, because it's 12 anywhere in the country, but quite often you'll get multiple in Victoria. So yeah, I'd say around 8 tournaments a year. But people travel as well. Like if we have a big tournament, which we do have a couple of in either Victoria, New South Wales every year, you'll get people from Perth, from WA, which is a 5-6 hour flight or something like that. You'll get people from Queensland and South Australia. So Australians definitely travel for their tournaments, but distance has never been a big problem for us, as it is, the Europeans seem very surprised by a 3-hour drive, which is very normal for us. In fact, a lot of my mates from Victoria this weekend, they're up in Sydney for Masters, and they drove up and they had about 3 cars of people. So the Australians definitely travel for tournaments.
Okay.
So you get the good practice in.
Okay, nice. All right. So then I guess in those tournaments, though, you're not seeing consistent winners at the top as far as like, well, let's kind of break it down a little bit. Good versus evil. Who seems to be more on the top?
Good.
Good. Say. So that's already a major difference from our meta. As you may have heard in our previous episodes, we seem to have this fascination with evil armies. So as far as good armies, you're leaning Gondor. What would you say like your top 3 just off the top of your head? I understand you have no metrics for this, but
for lists that appear from the good side?
Yeah, just kind of like the overall factions.
I'd say Rohan's pretty well liked. Particularly, all mounted Rohan. I know I said I saw a foot Rohan recently, but I'd say that appears quite frequently. You see a fair bit of Lothlorien. What's a third one? I'll probably Minas Tirith then.
Okay, I was going to ask. I was like, you said you saw that a lot. I was like, if it didn't make your top 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it'd be those 3.
So you're seeing
you do see like Iron Hills breaking in and whatnot, but in terms of like, look, everything gets a good showing, right?
Yeah, of course.
But in terms of what consistently shows up, it's those, and perhaps it's a bit skewed, the data almost, by the availability of those models for Minas Tirith, for Rohan.
And I was going to mention,
Lothlorien less the case, but I think we've got a pretty reasonable spread in Australia. I mean, and that's the problem. You asked me what the meta is of Australia. We don't actually terribly have one. It's the community isn't built that way to sort of seek out these combinations that are really powerful and then play them. It's never evolved that way. And I think it's because our tournaments actually aren't, whilst they're definitely competitive. I mean, our biggest tournament, Masters, which is happening right now, as I said, up in Sydney, you may have noticed all the memes that are happening on the Lord of the Rings page, which was a bit of controversy on GVHL. But that sort of sums it up pretty well. I don't think that there's a massive competitive streak in the community. Doesn't mean that the quality of the gaming isn't there. It's just that the drive to max out the list combinations isn't there.
So you'll find people often more emphasize just the fun of the game versus like winning a tournament. Like it's not actually that prestigious to win one. Like when you win a tournament. So when you win a tournament, is it like kind of like not really treated as any big deal? It's like, oh, okay, cool, but that's about it. So
I sort of need to say that the Lord of the Rings community, I think, Lord of the Rings came out in early 2000s?
Mm-hmm.
There was a group that has been playing since the early 2000s, right? So that's tournaments and everything. Some of these people, and there's 20 of them across the country, maybe 30 of them that have just been religiously playing. And at one point, that was the entire community in Australia. So winning tournaments doesn't really mean anything because they've all got 20 tournament wins.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter. And we get a lot of tournaments, as discussed earlier. So, apart from the bragging rights, it's seeking that title really isn't a thing anymore. It might be for the younger players, but I think when you've got that from almost like a bit of that leadership from that older group, that older generation of players who do dominate the top rankings of tournaments, visibly not caring that much about the win as so much as the quality of the games and the quality of the tournament, it does produce a culture that does not incentivize seeking out the meta.
So then do you find that lists that are considered not fun to play or like kind of frowned upon in your community? And I'll just give you some examples. Lists designed to shut down the opponent's ability to play, like Ringwraiths or Angmar, lists like that. Do you find that that's reduced? Like
absolutely. And what you see more often is things like all monster army lists. that are taken just for the fun. You know, you get a domination or, I don't know, a scenario that isn't well predisposed towards a 7-model army, but they've got it. You know, I've seen multiple times the all of the 9, you know, like the souped up 9 that can teleport around. I've seen them. Lots of White Council. It's not unusual at a tournament to see a 5-model White Council army. So people definitely take what they want.
Even before the Vanquishers were nerfed, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Before the Vanquishers ever existed, kind of.
Before the Vanquishers, there was the White Council.
Yeah. I'm just making sure.
Nobody ran. Except
some of our audience might confuse when you say White Council. They're thinking the new Legion that just came out. But you sound like you mean, no.
White Council.
Brought the White Council, okay.
Yeah.
So, now, I guess as far as Lady of Light, was she popular before she got nerfed? Like, and made it work almost impossible to bring?
You're talking a couple of years ago now, aren't you? Well, when did the nerf happen?
It's weird to say a couple of years since people couldn't play for 2 of those.
It was mid-COVID.
It was mid-COVID.
But the model before its nerfing was around a couple of years ago. But for that period, I'm trying to remember back.
We had about 3 years of Middle Earth SBG before COVID. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and that's where you had the souped up Galadriel.
That's where you had, I won't say souped up, it's so much as necessary Galadriel because of blinding light and all that.
Okay.
I mean, worldwide, you would see a prevalence of her, which is why, of course, the GBHL, as we, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I have noticed that basically how the GBHL play affects the FAQs. So
yes, absolutely.
So basically, was that a shock to Australians? Like, why did they do this to her? Like, she wasn't even like taken. Like, or was it already kind of known? Okay, yeah, we get why you took her
out. I don't think it was as big of an issue in Australia because she wasn't spammed. There might have been there might have been a prevalence that had to be taken, but it wasn't an issue.
I mean, if you're in a good meta area, it sounds like you are. If half the people are bringing Gondor and friends and Rohan and friends, she's not a necessary model.
Exactly.
Right. She's a necessary model if you're in the US and every other person is bringing Angmar or Corsairs. Right.
What I'm essentially doing is walking us through building your meta out, like defining it almost, or at least in the best possible way I can attempt to. Because seeing the models you don't take, and of course, then people are going to make natural counters to those things. So, okay, you don't see Angmar. So that makes sense that, all right, you're not seeing Lady of Light as much. Maybe like Matt said, you're not seeing heavy shooting armies. So now we could infer, just as Matt inferred, Corsairs might be more rare in your community. Are we correct on that?
Yes, you do see, I think, certain members of the community who have got those models take them. So look, if you have a 20-person army, 20-person tournament, you would stand a chance at seeing one Corsair army. Yeah. I'd say a good chance of seeing one, but I doubt you'd see more than that.
So then the need to take blinding light options is now reducing them. One, that you're not seeing Angmar, you're not seeing Ring Rays, shut down armies designed for that. You're also not seeing as many high volume shooting lists as many, because oftentimes a meta is built in response to what we see often.
Yes.
And so, this is where, like, it sounds like, so I'm going to eventually touch on that whole mobility aspect that you had mentioned earlier and like kind of redefine that, but, or like really dig into that. But I mean, I don't know, Evan, Matt, do you feel like I'm heading in the right direction as far as kind of identifying, okay, this is the meta that you're seeing here in Australia? Is there any questions you think are pertinent to ask to build that thought process?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'm curious about what information you have about either the current Masters or like the last Masters or last big tournament, kind of what the, what the winning lists were.
I had a look last night at Masters to see if I could get a list, the list of all the lists, but I couldn't, unfortunately. Look, I simply don't know what wins the big tournaments at the moment. To go back through and try and find them, bit too difficult. But look, if I can sort of offer something else that I think informs the meta, just as an interesting point, we have a system for casual games, and I think it's quite important to look at not just tournaments but casual games. in terms of how they're played and the culture that exists around that. And we have a system that is has been used quite widely for a reasonably long time, particularly in Victoria. I might be talking just a bit biased there. But we have a system whereby you have a veto system for the scenarios that you choose. So instead of it being you roll, you choose one, and then, oh, wow, it's not geared towards my list at all because it's all shooting and I get dropped in the middle in Clash of Champions. You can sort of bank reliably on getting a more balanced scenario, and that's by rolling for 3 scenarios. You roll, player who gets the lowest vetoes one, next player vetoes one, you play the one that wasn't vetoed. And you do that in casual games.
So yeah, okay. So let me just ask you a question. When you said you're rolling for 3 scenarios, are you rolling for a pool out of like the match play guide, or are you just rolling 3 scenarios randomly and then choosing amongst those?
So you roll 1 dice for the pool and then 1 dice for the one that's in there. So you can get across.
So you're doing it. The reason I bring this up is because the reason Mick isn't on this podcast is he's playing a tournament this weekend. And he was texting with us today as the tournament was going on, and he was playing in a system where they were using a veto system, but not using it based on pools. Somebody would just, the TO would pick out 3 random scenarios, and then you would pick based on that. And Evan and I played in a tournament like that here back in June, and the reason I bring this up is, as Mick pointed out, and I think is correct, that produces a very different game experience than the one where you pick scenarios out of pools, right? Because as he pointed out, what you can get is you can get like 1 Maelstrom scenario, 1 objective scenario, and 1 stand where you're going to kill scenario. So when you're vetoing, you're not vetoing like the Maelstrom scenario that's least favorable to you. You're vetoing the Maelstrom scenario if you are the army that likes to fight together in a death ball. You always veto that. Or if you're the Horde army, you always veto the big heroes killing other big heroes, so that you're going to get either a Maelstrom scenario or an objective scenario that's going to depend on numbers, as opposed to like the pool system like you're talking about, where it's like, all right, we know we're playing an objective scenario and we're going to veto the objective scenario in the form that we like the least.
So when I said that when you get pools, you are rolling for individual scenarios. We're not rolling a dice, getting a pool, and then we veto a pool. It's you roll 1 dice, you get a pool, you roll another dice, that determines which one is in the pool. And you do that 3 times. So 2 separate rolls.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear on that. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's... Look, what I think this does is that you would think that logically that would mean that people would specialize their armies more because they have more agencies in terms of getting rid of the scenarios that they don't like. But the thing is, the dice can still quite often give you 3 scenarios that are all not favorable to you. So you still need to have a list that's geared to be able to do a lot of different things. And there's no guarantee that in the veto system, you won't get 2 that are unfavorable, 1 that's favorable, and that one gets obviously vetoed by your opponent. So I think a lot of the lists in Lord of the Rings in Australia, you do get specialization, but they're almost, I personally think, taken for the joy of playing that list, or for the models or for the lore. And then everybody else, I would think, who is trying to play competitively quite often has a little bit of ability to do everything in terms of their list. So you've got a bit of CAD, you've got a bit of movement, you've got a bit of shooting, you've got a bit of counter to magic in some sort of way, whether or not that's some resistant to magic heroes that are a bit heavier, nice Store of Will, a caster, a good caster like a Stormcaller or something. Excuse me. Thank you. So yeah, look, that's sort of the scenario in which I see it. It's a reasonably well balanced list taking community. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Well, why don't you do this then? When Masters is over and the results are known, if you wouldn't mind, getting in touch with us and posting us like the top 10 lists. I mean, we don't need the whole list, but Gondor, Rohan, whatever. If you want to give us maybe like what the top 2 lists were, or top 3 lists or something like that, that'd be great. But the top 10 these were the top 10 armies.
Yeah, well, I'll
I'd
know
be
that
curious.
pretty soon. I'll know that today, so I'll send it through to you.
Yeah, okay.
And then I won't send you the whole tournament list, but I'll condense if I see any macro trends in the list that were taken, even though they were, lower in the rankings.
Sounds good. And maybe we can get back together and talk about it afterwards or whatever. We can talk about it on the show. That'd be great.
Right.
So you wanted to talk about so it sounds like somebody has built a Helm Hammerhand and his Royal Guard spam list, and you're looking for counters to that.
Well, yeah, and I think the thing that I almost want to start with is I personally think that Helm Hammerhand needs a nerf, and it's not a big nerf. He just needs something. He just needs to choose either he gets the free heroic combat or he gets the free might point. But to have both is ruthless to deal with, because I get that he's only fight 5. So big heroes with might can sort of shut him down a bit, and magic as well can shut him down. But by the time you sort of shut down Helm, the 8-inch throwing spears, 34 models or something like that, just rips you to pieces. And with Helm with free might, he can move his army around where he wants to. So yeah, if you want to have a discussion about that, I'm currently getting smacked around every second week by this list, and I'm wanting to get a counter to it.
How many models are there in this list? Break it down for us a little bit.
All right, Helm Hammerhand horse, a banner. I'd say probably 15 guys, or he's Hero of Legend, isn't he? So 18 guys. I'd say it's likely to be all foot bodyguard, Royal Guard.
All with throwing spears?
All throwing spears. You've got a King's Huntsman in there, I think by himself. You've got a foot Rohan captain leading a couple of Rohan warriors, but then again, predominantly, I would say about 8 Rohan Royal Guard with throwing spears. You've then got a mounted captain with, I would say, 5 riders, and then another 6 to 8 Rohan Royal Guard. And that's the list at 650 points.
So 18
or 750, sorry, 750.
I was going to say it's 650. That does not sound right. So how many models in total are we talking here?
Sounds like 45.
I'd say easily mid-30s, mid to high 30s.
Wait, so 18, 12, and 12? Or, well, okay, you said the ones that
but they might be a little bit underneath the warbands, but I'd say it's 3 full warbands.
Because the Royal Guard with throwing spear are not cheap.
No.
They are, what are they, like 11 points?
Yeah. With everything on them, yeah, I would imagine so.
So with throwing spears, they're 12 points.
With throwing spears, they're 12
10
points.
points plus the 2-point throwing spear.
That's pretty expensive. I mean, you could almost relate it to Fountain Court Guard spam, which people used to do back. Well, that was done with Denethor.
So that's 18 and 12. Ev, do you have the list builder up there?
I can work on making a list. I've also got Helm's Guard is one of the things I've been looking at for the new competitive season, as it were, because I'm incredibly bored of Angmar. So
well, I guess while he builds that, did you want to build it while
216? Yeah, I'm just well, because the numbers are key here. But anyway, yeah. So maybe build it up and see kind of what we're looking at if you just
okay. So my list is slightly different, I think.
Yeah.
Because my 750 is so it's 3 mounted warriors, and then Helm and 2 captains, no King's Huntsman, but then
the King's Huntsman was a weird choice. That one was kind of like, what? That's interesting.
Yeah, King's Huntsman.
And then it's slightly less Rohan Royal Guard. I think the Rohan Royal Guard are in front, and then there's warriors of Rohan with shield and spears behind, and then that gets up to around 43 models.
43 models, yeah.
And that's what I was expecting, something around that number count. And at 750, that seems appropriate.
But if he's got all Royal Guard, I suspect that number is going to be mid-30s at most.
I'm pretty sure
the Huntsman was. The Huntsman
34?
was something. The Huntsman was something I was considering throwing it at 800, because then you start running out of warband slots. But when I made my list, and well, clearly whomever is playing this list against you, there must be some merit to it because it's working. But when I was building the list, I was more focused on maximizing the numbers along with Helm in order to sort of provide that second threat that you otherwise can't really provide in that list, because it's really just Helm and then captains and then maybe a King's Huntsman.
Yeah, and that, by the way, is the vulnerability in this list. I mean, having played a variant of this, is that, you know, this is the prototypical all eggs are in one basket list, and when Helm goes down, the wings fall off the list and it crashes out of the sky. Yeah. So, you know, what you want to do is bring Helm down.
Which isn't like incredibly hard. I mean, even if you just got him off horse, like he's not, like once he's just a man, like just kind of walking around.
He's but a man.
Yeah.
So,
well, look, I'll give you a good example. I felt exactly the same, and I played him with a Saruman mounted with a hell of a lot of Isengard Urukai. But it was the divide and conquer. You know, the scenario where you come on in separate board edges.
Yep.
So Helm just made a beeline for one of my warbands, and he's probably one of the best troop killers in the game.
Yeah, just ate the warband.
And ate it so exceptionally quick that Saruman, just even getting across the board, by the time he got there, the entire warband was gone. And I did as much as I could to sort of delay. I had a drum to be able to get my guys, sort of keep them running away to draw Helm away from the middle of the board. And then I can just camp down and Saruman can just sort of create a bubble. But it's just with the free might and the free heroic combat, you don't really see anything that's capable of tearing through troops like that. And so if you're unlucky enough to get a Maelstrom.
Yeah. So, all right. So solutions. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, before I want to just give a quick analysis on why I think this is so good for you guys. Is I think this list is sort of like the power in the Australian meta, because from what we've heard about your meta, I mean, you've talked about how, you don't really play in shield walls. You do a lot of maneuvering, a lot of positioning. This list feeds off of that because one, you've got Helm, who's got 2 heroic actions in a turn. So the more turns you play, the more heroic actions you get. And you've got 50 bajillion throwing spears, which effectively, the more positioning your opponent does, the more damage they're doing to you. And of course, the list, because it only has 1 hero, it doesn't, other than the fight value 5 bubble effect, it doesn't really have any bubble effects. And it's got a whole bunch of bodyguard all over the board. It can split up extremely well and take armies piecemeal extremely well. So I think the reason this is less threatening in the sort of US UK metas where they play more cohesive armies that are able to muster the force to be able to just charge in and just fight straight out. I think those metas are more equipped than the Australian meta, which, as you said, is more positioning, take more turns to figure out when to charge, then charge. So I think that may be part of the issue.
So,
and I think you touched on something there where you said with the more turns that you play, the more Helm, if he's not neutralized earlier in the game, becomes lethal. Because I found that in this game, I made a comeback with Isengard, but what I couldn't trump was once I ran out of resources, which I had saved up, Helm was able just to call the heroic move every turn. And in the late game, it became a problem because as well, even if you break his list, if Helm's still alive, the bodyguard sticks around. Yeah. So it's absolutely key to kill Helm. And if you don't do that, it's pretty hard list to crack.
So a couple of thoughts here just on counter. So let's talk about counters to Helm, and then let's talk about counters to Helm's army. The first counter to Helm is the easiest counter to Helm is anybody that has a ring wraith, because you just black dart his horse. There's nothing you can do about it. He's on the ground, and you spend whatever resources you buy a ring wraith. You spend whatever resources you need to get that horse on the ground. Even if it's I'm going to spend 4 will, and then I'm going. If I roll the 1, I'm going to spend both mine on it. And
it may not be necessary because Witch King in our meta is like super common. So
yeah, I mean, if you take the Witch King, it becomes a hell of a lot easier to do it. But you can take a budget wraith and it will be the best 70 points you've ever spent, just to because you can blow all his resources to get Helm off of his horse, and you have then gotten back your 70-point investment.
And as a quick side note, Gandalf, which is also common in our metas, Sorcerer's Blast onto a Royal Guard into Helm probably will be fairly easy.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I did when I was in range. Saruman was great with the reroll.
Yeah, I mean, the only problem with that is if he is a good player, it can be very hard to get a blast in range. Eventually, he'll probably slip up and you'll do it, but there is no counter to the Black Dart from the Wraith. It's just you get the Wraith within 12 inches and he's going to be off his horse. So that's number one. Counters to the army itself, I think there are at least two. I mean, and they're the two.
Well, my mind was shooting.
Was what?
Because was shooting.
Well, that's why I named Gandalf.
Yeah, okay. But in particular, what shooting? Because you've also got his shooting back with throwing spears. The two armies that I think are going to be fairly hard counters to this list are Assault on Lothlorien and the Emperor Legendary Legion, for two different reasons.
You mean Assault upon Helm's Deep?
Not. Oh well, yeah, okay. And Assault three lists that are a counter to this. Sorry,
I don't actually know about. My debate mode is on. I haven't heard your reasoning for Assault upon Lothlorien yet, but
all right, I shall give it.
We may be debating about that.
Yeah. So the reasoning is that they get a bunch of shooting, they get shooting that is going to outrange the throwing spears. So we can, if necessary, back up, and it's going to be doing +1 to wound, which his throwing spears aren't, unless he's shooting something at you. But as soon as Helm charges in against somebody, everybody with a bow or a throwing weapon in the Goblin army then targets that combat and knocks Helm off of his horse, and may well wound him. Because if I'm remembering correctly, is he only defense 5?
No, he's defense 7.
He's 7.
Defense 7. Okay. All right. Well, still. I mean,
Plus
you're
one
still,
wound, no.
you're still wounding him. You're still wounding him on a 5.
Yeah. So you might as well be defense like
with the throwing weapons, or with a 5 followed by a 3 with the bows. So it's still an easy wound situation. Plus, you're going to knock him off his horse very easily, and then see above as to what happens after you knock off his horse.
Side bonus, you also kill your own troops if you fail to kill him.
Yeah, and then he doesn't get his. He doesn't
get his combat.
Right, exactly. And by the way, if he flubs, if he charges 2 guys and you put a 2 spears in and he flubs, you're going to be getting the +1 to wound on him, and you're definitely going to knock him off his horse, and you may well wound him too, even at defense 7. And you at 750 points, you're going to have a lot of guys to do this with. And you also have the bonus where you're going to get him into a position where he's going to be moving first. And he's going to move first. He's going to get into something. And, if he gets into a bat, you enrage it. If he gets into a, a spider, you enrage it. And then, he needs to deal with that problem. He needs to strike up. He can't combat. And you also have the situation where you can counter by getting an invisible bat or an invisible spider into him if he doesn't have enough troops surrounding his backside. So anyway, those are all the counters.
Yeah, heroes with strike just in general, because Chancellor's already used his 3-point might, and then you start chewing into that might store with strikes. And
you've also got Musger or whatever the guy is who's just hitting him with wither every turn. Going to hit him with 4 withers. And all of them should go off. Some of them are probably going to get through, and his strength 5 guy is going to be running around at strength 3 or something like that. It'd be a lot less scary.
What do you think of Helm just as a model in general?
I think he's a good model.
Yeah.
But I think he has limitations in his Legendary Legion, which I think is where you have to take it. That he's going to run into certain armies and certain figures that are just hard counters to him, like the Ring Wraith.
I honestly think he was appropriately made because he's overcosted when taken outside the Legion, and in the Legion he's alone. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think with Matt, like you said, like there's too many hard counters to list, and just my opinion.
Yeah. So, and by the way, the Dragon Emperor Legendary Legion is a hard counter because all of the heroes are fight 6. Rutabi can actually go. Rutabi can go head to head with Helm. Helm can never charge Rutabi, especially if it's Rutabi with 2 pikes behind her, and be sure that he isn't going to die. Because he's going in, he has to strike. If he goes in against Rutabi, he has to strike up. Rutabi is going to counter 2/3 of the time, and if Helm blows that, and Rutabi wins it, he is probably he's certainly getting off his horse.
Well, I guess the thing is, Helm wouldn't go into Rutabi.
Yeah,
Helm would just be killing 2. Yeah. He'd be killing 4 Acelings a turn.
Yeah, but I mean, as long as Rutabi stays near him, and she can, then she needs to get close enough so that she can counter his free heroic move with her free heroic move and get into him. And even, by the way, if Helm goes into 2 guys, and those 2 guys are fight 5, and they're backed up by 4 other guys who are also fight 5, Helm has to strike up, and he can still blow it. And if he blows it again, he'll be off his horse, and he may well get wounded by the 6 attacks that are coming back.
And what I like about it is the throwing spears against defense 6 army that is cheapened, because you're bringing the Emperor, who's making now all Black Dragons free, and also because of the warband size increase is now by default bringing in more troops. Like the throwing spears have slightly less of an effect, especially since all of your pike support, anything has shields, they're all defense 6.
Yeah,
so just a good note on that.
And also at 750 points, the Dragon Emperor list is going to have an equivalent number of figures. They're going to be at fight 5, and it's going to have 2 fight 6 hitters, and it's going to have probably a Borgir that's going to be it may have 2 fight 6 hitters and a fight 5 hitter that can strike up, or it's going to have a Borgir that's going to be tremoring Helm Hammerhand.
Him off in force. Yeah.
Okay. Or just tremoring whole bunches of defense 6 throwing spear guys. And killing
that's a good way to say it.
It's just interesting thoughts. I mean, these are specific legions. So obviously, but I think your friend presents a really good list, a variant of that list, but I think we just don't see, I think Evan's analysis is right. We just don't see Helm that much because we can shut him down so fast because our lists generally are designed to take out a big hero. Like that is an expectation that you're going to be doing.
I didn't bring it up so much because it's a reappearing model in our meta, such as it were, but only because I've played this list, I think, twice now recently. It's my most 2 recent games. And it was just current on my mind, and I wanted to see what you guys were thinking about it.
Yeah.
But
out of
it's not as if everyone's running around with a Helm in Australia. I've seen only this one guy.
Well, Devin is right, by the way, that the Helm's list is a great way to exploit the meta as you have described it. Of armies that don't fight in battle lines, that tend to be kind of, warrior, good warrior focused, that don't have a lot of evil and don't have a lot of like spellcasters, and maybe have less shooting. And by the way, Evan's also right that the assault on Helm's Deep is also a hard counter to this because Helm gets 2 ballista shots every turn, and eventually one of them is going to hit.
Yeah,
I guess the other thing is, and just factor it in, is does this player typically win more games than not? Like,
it's good. He's a good player. He's a great player.
This is something
top 20
that
in Australia at least.
And this is, we have to factor that conversation in because this might be a player that, like, for example, Jay Clare had mentioned it at the American tournament. He's like, I could probably take on a lot of these lists and whatever. I'm like, well, Jay, you probably throw you in almost any meta and you'll take on most everything with almost any list. Jay has been proven to win, massive tournaments with Dunlendings and like random chaff. And so So essentially, this might be a player where it's not the list itself. It's just in the hands of a player that is problematic, like in general. So I mean, like almost like you hand this list to not a bad player, but just, anyone in the community, and suddenly it's not a problem anymore and you're crushing it. Like, and it's, so it's just a factor to consider is like, is the player just so skilled that this list in his hands is just very difficult to fight?
Well, he is one of those players that I have said they occur a lot in the Australian community who takes very, very law-friendly lists and is good with them. But I think I perhaps got a bit of a shock when I played this list twice, and it was I was playing with Isengard against Maelstrom, and then I think it was the other one was Clash by Moonlight, where you get the +1 to wound. Now I was playing with crossbows. So my shooting was negated because you can't move and shoot with crossbows, but you can damn well move and shoot.
This army is devastating in Clash by Moonlight.
Yeah,
against all armies, by the way, except for Assault on Lothlorien, which don't give a damn. And flips the script on that one quite effectively.
So now you're actually throwing a new variable where it shows, okay, well, you fought in a disadvantaged scenario. Not to say that you couldn't have won. But when you're fighting in a scenario that's a disadvantage against a player whom actively wins more than he loses, like chances are it's going to make the list seem better than it is.
That's a good point. And I think that's become apparent in just talking it out with you guys.
Yeah, I think honestly, like you hand this list, I think we get the idea. So essentially, I'm not sure. I mean, other than that, I think we kind of get sort of the perspective of how we would beat this list. But
yeah. So if you're basing one of your data points off of Clash by Moonlight, this is an army that dominates Clash by Moonlight because of that +1 weapons.
And you can also keep in mind the list you're playing. Like at no point did any of us mention any of the qualities that Isengard has. Like Matt was describing the advantages and why, right? When we mentioned defense 6, fight 6, fight 5 consistency. Then he talked about spellcasters that have an advantage against Helm. You literally have none of the qualities that in the standard Isengard list. He mentioned the bats and all that, the natural sword reases that knock out heroes. Like other than Saruman himself, whom can cause problems at some range, and then of course your crossbow shots were completely neutered by the dark. So
my secondary hero other than Saruman was Vrasku.
Yeah. So now even he became more useless.
So by the way, I think the correct technique with Saruman against this guy is unless he is screwed up and left random warrior standing 2 inches from this guy in a line that Saruman can blast, is Saruman is using his, especially in the scenario where you divide and conquer and Saruman's a ways away, is Saruman has to get within 18 inches of this guy and just transfix him every turn. And then because he will spend will to stop that and until he has no will left, and then use Sorcerous Blast him.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And he can't slow down because the whole army stops with him. Normally, that is not a problem in most armies, but with that army, if he stops moving, they stop moving, which means a crossbow volley. Like, and so like so much of that game, you can already see it. It's like, you're almost not destined to lose, but if you get what I'm saying, like you were really on the back foot here. So with the army in particular that you brought, but even if you weren't in the dark, like you have a defense 5 army, like crossbows or 12-man warband over here, you got pikes, defense 5. Isengard might be thought of as defense 6, but it is actually majority defense 5. And so therefore throwing spears, that many of them, fuck, like it's gonna be really that day, right? Like, so I really think there's a lot of variables here. So that's why I think you're seeing maybe this weird thing where it's like me, Evan, and Matt are kind of like, what's the big deal? Like, but I think you had a situation.
Well, look, I also brought it up because it's something that I sort of wanted to discuss just as a point of what's been happening recently in my games. But yeah, no, I get what you mean, and there are certainly counters to it. So yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So I mean, so this is an interesting meta discussion because I think Devin hit it on the head when he said this is something that is very powerful in your current meta that is much more vulnerable to countering in our current meta.
I should make the point. It is not currently like destroying the meta in Australia.
And I wanted to bring that up because Henry did say that.
But it's
not actually in the meta.
Yeah, it's effective. It's effective against your meta, right?
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
This would assume that Henry plays his meta, but I think given what Henry just described, I think meta or not, he was pretty well guaranteed to wipe you out. Just in the situation that you've mentioned. That was only one game, and I get it. He's beaten you in multiple games, but also, it also sounds like you're fighting against your equivalent of a Jay Clare. Like, this is like he would have been difficult to deal with regardless of what he said. Now, I don't know that. I literally don't know.
He's good. He's good. He's good. He's a top 15, top 10 player.
And when I say Jay Clare, I don't mean like top player in your community. I mean just like for example, I give any list to Matt and Evan, and I'm worried. Like, unless they're playing with like ruffians, I'm like, all right, I need to play. Like, I need to bring it here, right?
Hey, Devin, you haven't seen my ruffians yet. You don't know that.
You're right. So like, that's the way I would think of it. It could be debated whether or not Evan or Matt are top players in our entire nation, but any list in their hands, it's a problem. And so that's what I think this guy is. That's how in my interpretation of it. But I think it's a cool list idea. I think for anyone actually wanting to play Helm Hammerhand, I think that list, that variation of list, is probably a top way to do it.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's a cool list. I really liked the mass Rohan Royal Guard throwing spell. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, except for the King's Huntsman. That's weird.
Yeah, I ditched the King's Huntsman and just buy more figures. But.
Yeah, that part threw me off. I'd love to hear his reason, like why he included that. But
so by the way, time, and I'll send it through with my when I get the tournament rankings. I'll ask him.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
So by the way, we have done a couple different variations of like the worst 5 heroes in the game, and the worst the worst ... And the King's Huntsman is a perennial subject to come up in that on those lists. But
he's
anyway.
appeared more in those lists than in any
other lists that any of us have ever put together. Yeah, that's true.
So I guess just to round this out, just for sake of time, what we're going to do is we're going to spend about 10 minutes, all right, discussing the Rings of Power episode 6. For those of you who have not seen it, spoiler alert, we're going into heavy spoilers here. So if you do not want to be spoiled, you're not missing much more. That's it. This is the last of the episode, 10 minutes on this, and that's about it. So this is your time to back out now, and we will get into it. Now, as I have not seen Rings of Power episode 6, I will actually take my own advice, and I will exit now. But enjoy the discussion, guys, and I'll end up seeing you soon.
All right, guys. So what did everybody think about episode 6, Galadriel Goes Genocidal? That was the subtitle of the episode, right?
I think it's pretty fair to say, yes.
It's interesting because have you guys been having this too with not just this episode? And I think the ending of this episode I really liked. I liked the plot twist of Mordor being because it's Mordor, right?
That was Mount Doom. I questioned the geology behind that, but this is a world with magic rings and dragons, so I don't think I can question it too hard. But
yeah, and honestly, I'm happy they just did something, because despite how beautiful this show is, I just find myself continually being more bored by it than I should be. And it's not, the acting's great. Most of the acting's great. The cinematography is good. The sets are beautiful, but so much of it comes down to people standing around and talking about things that actually aren't particularly interesting. And I almost feel like where we are at with 6 episodes could have been done in 3 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a Tolkien novel.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so not to diss on the novels too much, but I have to say that what you just described is completely on brand for the Tolkien novels, not the Peter Jackson films, but the Tolkien novels. I think that's right. I mean, but look, this is not a Peter Jackson movie where you're trying to get you've got a 3-hour arc of an individual movie, even with the extended edition, and a 9-hour arc of the entire set of novels. This is going to be 50 hours, right? And there was a lot of table setting in the previous few episodes. And I mean, to a certain extent, the last 5 hours, the first 5 hours of the series that we watched were all table setting for episode 6. I mean, I think this kind of brought a whole bunch of arcs to a head. And both the Numenorian arc kind of reached, I mean, it's not the end, but it kind of reached an inflection point during that episode, and the Southern arc reached its inflection point in this episode. And I think a lot of those previous 5 episodes were just table setting for all of this.
Would you almost say as well, I couldn't help but feel that despite the grandeur of how expansive it is and the set and the fact that we get to see Numenor and it's beautiful, is that it felt too small scale. They sent 5 ships and 500 men to go save a village that just frankly didn't seem that important. Now, I understand that it may have been the case that it was that beyond the watchtower, there was more lands of men that would have fallen prey to the orcs. But it just seemed like it was a village of 100 people getting saved by a contingent of Numenorians versus, 1,000-man orc army. It just seemed very small scale. And I'm surprised that they didn't, go instead of 1,000 orcs, there's 10,000 orcs. And instead of sending 500 Numenorians, we're sending 1,000 Numenorians, and then have more villages. I don't understand why they went so small scale with such a big thing as the creation of Mordor.
Well, okay, so let me try and give an answer to that. I don't know if this is true, but I suspect this is, and I don't know, frankly, if anybody would admit this is true, but I suspect this is the answer to this, at least in part, is that this was done in the wake of the Hobbit movies. The Hobbit movies were roundly criticized for overuse of CGI and basically turning an entire movie, doing an entire movie of a battle. I mean, that's what the Battle of Five Armies was, an entire movie. And there's a lot of backlash to that. And what you are not seeing in this movie are CGI armies, right?
Yeah.
What you saw in episode 6 was a battle scene that was done with people on, real people on real horses.
And look good.
And they look good. They looked great. They looked, frankly, better than anything Jackson filmed. And the reason that it was better than anything Jackson filmed was you didn't have a whole bunch of high school girls in a riding club with beards taped onto their face riding around on horses, which is what the Rohirrim were. And don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing Jackson for doing this. I think it was a masterstroke that he pulled it off, and he managed to turn this into an army. But that's not what they were going to do here. They were going to actually get real people and do real practical effects and do real battle scenes where real people are fighting. And even if you were going to be throwing $1 billion at a project, there are limitations on how many real people you can create in New Zealand and fight a battle with. Especially if this isn't the climactic battle in a 3-hour movie, it's one battle in a host of a 50-hour series. And I think that's it.
And look, maybe that's the thing though, is that, all right, we've gone 6 episodes at an hour apiece. We're already at the entire length of 2 of the Lord of the Rings movies. And I can't help but feel that we've only just gotten out of the Shire, in Fellowship of the Ring in terms of story development.
Because we have, because we're in a 50-hour arc, and we have. Right? We are slightly more than 1/10 of the way through this arc at this point.
Okay. But that being in mind, and that's fair enough, and I wouldn't have any problem with it, but I don't actually feel like we're getting that much for how much table setting we've had, as you said. The payoff with Mordor was good, but by God, I feel like we could have cut out half of it and gotten that payoff of Mordor, and that would have been a good plot point for the end of episode 3. That would have kept me interested and would have made me think, okay, this show is going to have points that move. But if there's one thing that I hate in TV shows and movies, and perhaps you might agree with me on this, it's the setup where they do, all right, we're going to have a discussion amongst characters where one character wants something and another character is going to say no. Then something small happens, like you have a little Halbrand getting into a fight, and then the character goes and tries to attempt to convince them again, and then they say yes. And you go, what was the point in all of the toing and froing of, oh, we're not going to go to Middle-earth, we're not going to do that, and then just decides that we are. I mean, you look at Lord of the Rings, Aragorn runs into Rohan, into the hall, and says, the beacons are lit. And you see the close-up of Theoden, and he dwells on it for a moment, and you get the depth of that decision. But then he says, and Rohan will answer, and we're off. Yeah. And the weight of that is clear. Instead, in Rings of Power, we get 10 minutes of them just bickering over it, and then no real development. But then suddenly they decide to go to Middle-earth, and I can't help but feel that happens a lot in this show so far.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder whether if you tried to compress the character arcs of these particular characters, whether it would be the result would come out as effectively as either the Jackson movies or frankly as we're seeing here, because these are characters that, with the exception of Galadriel, who's a very different person from the movie, we know nothing about. None of these actors are Cate Blanchett or Viggo Mortensen. And you know, I just wonder whether I just wonder, and by the way, you know, we're only 60% of the way through this particular series, and you know, we're in the middle. So I mean, that was a payoff, but that's not the big payoff. The big payoff is coming in 4 hours. And you know, I wonder if it would have been. It's possible it could have been done with less table setting. I don't know.
No, fair enough.
What did you think, Evan? This has been Henry and I debating. What did you think?
Yeah, apologies, Evan.
I mean, I think I liked it. It definitely felt like there's some Game of Thrones style teleporting going on. With the Númenóreans, and with the guy bringing the sword all the way up to the waterfall, it was kind of unclear, you know, how much time had passed. But apparently he got there and he opened the lock. And I mean, obviously the physics was the physics. That's always going to be the case in these sorts of films.
And the geology was the geology.
But I think I definitely enjoyed the episode more so than the episodes beforehand, because well, I do agree that being able to have these long character arcs and having this setup can work very well. I don't think they added enough pizzazz, I guess, in the earlier episodes in order to prevent the show from getting slightly boring before, you know, the big payoff, which was obviously Mount Doom popping into existence. So I think it's reasonable to say that the amount of time before this was justified. I think they needed to add a little bit more into the earlier episodes to sort of keep retention and keep things interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're also doing things that are different than the Lord of the Rings did, rightly or wrongly, and some of that is spinning out the time available, and that's they're not just setting up dramatic arcs; they're setting up mystery arcs. And you know, we've talked about this in some of our recaps. You know, there's a lot of, you know, the who is the stranger that came down by a meteor. There's the who is Sauron, and you know,
can we talk about that? Because I haven't discussed
oh yeah,
that
sure.
anyone.
So this has been a reoccurring theme. Who's your vote for who is Sauron?
Look, I think a lot of people think it's Halbrand. I actually think that it's the guy that we saw next to the crater, the blonde-haired guy, or it's those are like acolytes, and we haven't seen Sauron yet. But I think that Sauron has either not been on screen or is associated with those three. But I think Halbrand is the interesting one here. I think he's the Witch King. I think Halbrand's going to get a ring and will become the Witch King, because it was 9 rings given to the race of men.
Yeah.
And I think it will be him.
Yeah.
The other thing too is I would love it if they make the stranger, they pull a Swiftie on everyone, and instead of it being Gandalf, it's Saruman. Because I think that would be really interesting to see a good Saruman and his origins, but you do start to see a little bit of that darkness in him, and you pull a 180 on everyone. Anyway, that's my call.
Yeah. So all interesting thoughts. And by the way, I am also in I think it's Halbrand camp, although I have to say it is more kind of aspirational at this point. So I think you're right. He is by far the most interesting choice to be Saruman. I also think he would make an interesting dramatic choice to be the Witch King. I think he would make an interesting dramatic choice to be the King of the Dead. I think all of those things. I think if he were the Witch King, I think him being the Witch King is in some ways the one that would clang most with the lore, even the undeveloped lore we had. Because if he's the Witch King, Galadriel knows he's the Witch King. And if she was buddies with the Witch King back before he became the Witch King, I think it would have worked at some point into the books before now. Right.
Do you think Amazon would care about that?
Yes. From what I've been seeing of the way they've been handling it, they do care immensely for the lore that's in the books. And even if some of it is disappearing for editorial reasons, because they can't put all of 33,000 years of history into a 50-hour miniseries, they do seem to be taking steps to either not contradict the lore or at least explain away contradictions. The one outstanding point being the whole we need Mithril to infuse light into the elves storyline, which seems to make no sense. But I
didn't like that. I didn't like that. Change.
Yeah, I mean that hasn't played out yet. So I don't quite know where that's going. I've seen some interesting discussions about that this is actually a byproduct of Celebrimbor being twisted somehow by Sauron into basically playing stuff. And that would be interesting because we don't really have any detail. We know that happened, right? We know Celebrimbor got twisted, but we don't know how. So, I mean, that could be just as good a rationalization as any. Who knows? But right now, I mean, that clangs. I mean, if Halbrand's the Witch King, that would clang with me. But if they're going to stay on with this, the elves need Mithril to get reinfused with light, that's going to clang with me even more. So,
but there's no guarantee as well that Galadriel has to know that it's Halbrand that becomes the Witch King. There's no guarantee.
But how could she not know? I mean, they're setting her up to fight side by side with him, at least for a while. And, how could he become a prominent king, get a ring, and go over to evil without her realizing it's the same guy, right?
Okay, well, fair call. But I guess also in that sense, why would it be? I mean, you look at the books in terms of Galadriel's dialogue. What do we have? We have her talking to Frodo in Lothlorien, maybe a couple of conversations with Gandalf, but there isn't a whole lot of dialogue or places for that to be mentioned.
Now, look, that's true. I mean, could they pull this off? Sure. Yeah, and yeah, you're perfectly right. They could pull it off. I mean, look, I guess it's equally true that, she never mentioned, if Halbrand was Sauron, she never mentions, actually, I knew this guy.
Yeah, it's the same thing, same problem, I guess.
But
although I guess with Sauron though, it's less of a thing because it's a disguise.
Right.
So if she's talking about Sauron, she wouldn't be like, oh, he tricked us at some point. But if it's somebody that she knew was once good, and became Sauron, that's much more different. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I guess interests me about the whole Halbrand is Sauron story arc, if in fact that is going on. So there's one thing, and this happened again during this last episode. So I've been going ups and downs in this thing, and a couple episodes ago, I was convinced that he was going to be Sauron because of the way he was. This was after the kind of the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde scene he has, where he just kind of goes ballistic. Goes, don't make me angry, and then they make him angry, and he, basically displays almost superhuman strength. But then we went through the episode where what convinced me at the end of that was I thought he was not going to go back to Middle Earth, and he was going to stay in Numenor. He was going to whisper in Alfaron's ear, and he was going to cause.
But also too, lore-wise, Sauron's disguise is supposed to be an elf. That directly contradicts.
No, I don't think he is. I think he's supposed to be a man. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think he takes the form of a fair elf.
I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at that. I thought he took the body of a man, and he stayed on Numenor, and that body was destroyed when Numenor sank. But he came to Numenor as a prisoner. So was Halbrand. He stayed behind. There's a bunch of things in there. Halbrand displays an affinity for making things out of metal. And
good point. Actually, I hadn't considered that.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's some really interesting stuff that happened in episode 6, because I thought once he went to the Southlands that, oh no, wait, it can't be Sauron. And then some interesting stuff happened in episode 6 when he was dealing with Adar.
Yeah, there was that thing where didn't Adar say like he split his face open or something, and then and then Halbrand was like, he did something to me a while ago that I'll never forgive him for.
Yes, sirree. And Halbrand goes, "Don't you know who I am?" And Adar's like, "No." And all of a sudden,
you think Halbrand might be just putting on a play?
Say again.
Do you think Halbrand? My initial read of that situation was Halbrand. There's a lie in there somewhere, and I think he's putting on a show. And I think he was actually about to kill Adar to try and preserve that lie.
So yes, maybe. I think he was going to kill Adar because I think he thought Adar knew who he was. I think, by the way, if Halbrand is Sauron, Adar has been running this thing in Mordor off the books, right?
Yes.
And Adar has kind of like gone into the void and taken over Sauron's people, and Sauron does not like that. And so I think that's where it was, kind of coming from. And the other thing that's interesting was maintained throughout episode 6 in his conversations with Adar is if you go back and you kind of replay and you listen to these episodes again, everything Halbrand has said could be true if he is Sauron. And
that's a really good point.
That was maintained throughout episode 6.
Yeah, that continuity fit.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess where I'm going with all this is I think it is going to be, I think a character arc for Sauron is going to be, it is interesting. I suppose there are going to be a lot of purists that aren't going to like this because they want Sauron to be like the ultimate evil from start to finish. But I think if Halbrand is Sauron, he is a conflicted evil, right? And he, because you see this even in Adar, right? I mean, these are the, this is the classic like villain trope, like the best, the good villains think they're right, and Adar is clearly one of them. And
And
if we have,
I've been loving that. He's my
yeah,
favorite.
no, he's
so
great.
far.
And if we have a conflicted Sauron, I think that also will be great, because I think that by the way, I don't think a lot of people are going to want to admit this, but I think that is actually true to the lore. That Sauron did what he did thinking he was right. And I think if they kind of bring that through with Halbrand, where he's being pulled to the dark side of the light side of the Force as well as the dark side of the Force, I think that's going to be interesting.
Bringing our gaming system into this, what are you looking most forward to for getting models for, if that ever happens, from what we've seen already?
Well, obviously, we need to put together an army of about 100 Numenorian captains, because those are the only guys who can ride horses, right?
Yeah, good point. Look, the orcs, I think I love their design with the bone helmets. I think they're really cool, and I think they would look fantastic if Games Workshop or whatever it's called make a whole lot of models. I think that'd be absolutely gorgeous models.
Yeah, but unfortunately, they're still going to be Fight 3, right?
Yeah, and they're still going to be shoot value 5 up as well, despite what happened in that final battle where the guys just got absolutely overwhelmed by arrows.
Well, you know what? You know what's going to be. You know what really annoyed me about this episode is, if anything, this episode validated the stupid special rule that goes with the Clash by Moonlight scenario, where you get +1 to wound when it's dark. Because what happens is you get a whole bunch of guys shooting out of the dark and just mowing people down. And it's like, no, come on, don't encourage them. That's not real. That's not a thing. But no, it's apparently a thing in this universe. So
there's another issue with that too, which is if in Clash by Moonlight it's nighttime, right? And that's why they have that rule. That would imply that it has every other scenario is during the day, and orcs aren't meant to be able to go out during the day. Like these orcs can't, yeah. And they've been preserving that very well in this TV show, which I've really appreciated. The fact that the orcs have been only coming out at night. Otherwise, they wear their cloaks.
Or when it's cloudy. It could just be that every battle with orcs is fought when it's cloudy.
True, Saruman's just put the clouds out over the battlefield.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously we need to get Galadriel in heavy armor on horse. And
Elendil.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, who apparently has not developed his superhuman capabilities yet, since he gets dismounted by an orc.
Yes, true.
Well, I mean,
he was not getting a lot of heroic combats off.
I've played Elendil before, and I've had him get dismounted by orcs as well. So I don't know if that's super unlikely.
But it's rare that you see him having to get saved by Isildur. Which needed to happen here.
He gets bodied by Sauron, and then Isildur runs to his side. So I guess we've only ever seen Elendil at this point lose combats.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say Elendil did not come across as a Fight 7, Strength 5, 3 attack hero in this particular.
I was almost expecting in the scene where Galadriel was fighting the recruits that Elendil would go for a bout with her, and it would be sort of a draw, and they would have a bit of mutual respect for each other because Elendil would be able to hold his own against her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
yeah, I don't know. We'll have
get
to
that Fight 7
from
from somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, we've still got 40 hours or so before for him to build up from whatever fight value he's at now to Fight 7, but
and gain a couple of inches.
Yeah. Or have everybody else get shorter. So
at least his troops will get shorter, as according to the Numenorian warriors we have now.
Yeah, I mean,
God.
Yeah, so I guess the closest. Now I'm trying to think of, what a Numenorian cavalry figure would look like, and I guess it would be, fight 4, strength 4, armed with lance. And it would either be defense 5 or defense 6. I don't quite know how you rate that.
They'd have shield. I think they'd be defense 6.
Yeah. Well, it What matters is whether you count that that kind of leather reinforced corset they're wearing as defense, as armor or heavy armor.
I think you'd have to put that as a base defense 5. I think defense 6 is probably too generous.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what Games Workshop would do with that, but I could see them being like Rohirrim, like, because it is a leather base rather than a metal base. So
is it?
Yeah, I think so.
They have the central body plate armor?
Yeah, no, I think that is a leather corset, and I think that's because they're on ships. Because you can, the leather doesn't sink quite as quickly as the metal does. But I think that's what I saw. Although, I mean, that's what I saw them wearing on the ships. It was a little unclear to me whether they're still wearing the same type of armor when they're on horses.
Who do you think the stranger is?
I think it's Gandalf.
Yeah, I think it kind of has to be Gandalf, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't see Saruman mucking around with hobbits.
I wish they had done it though. Would have been cool to see.
Yeah. All right. Well, Henry, it's great catching up with you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on. Much appreciated.
All right. Take care, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed this, and stay tuned, and we'll see you in another week or so. Bye-bye, everybody.
There you go.